Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to introduce tonight Endeavour, architectural office here in Antwerp. I started to invite them, I think, 2 years ago when I started developing this new program here in the school, Expanding Academy. And so Maarten de Smet was asked to join this team, and he brought the bigger team of Endeavour. So tonight they will talk about their practice. Why I invited them tonight is specifically related to a project we will start soon at the Stadswaag, around the corner of the school, because this square is going to be redeveloped soon. I think now they will start the works towards the summer, I think. It has been delayed a few times. But the idea is there, and we'll talk more about it later on, is to develop let's say, a process of what art in public space could be. So the commission from the city was to do art integration there, but we tried to bend this more into a process of what art in public space could be. It relates, I think, a lot to what Endeavour does as an architectural office, this notion of dialogue that they bring into the practice, and to bring people together and to maybe hold them together in order to realize the process. So now I give the floor to them to explain their practice.
Thank you, Nico. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you all for being here. Okay, so we're Endeavour. That some of us are here. Some of us are doing workshops somewhere in Flanders, in Hulsthout, somewhere, of all places, and others are taking time off in Berlin. So we're 15 in total. There's more women than men actually in our team. Yeah. So okay, what kind of profile are we, or what kind of people are we? Think Endeavour started from activism. Tim, Seppe, and myself were engaged in some activist projects here in Antwerp as professionals too, as with a background in architecture, and we started realizing that there is need for a role for professionals, for architects, for spatial professionals to engage in dialogue with people. So not to let's say that our activism was not our best way of what we thought was the best way of working. We thought there was need for a more constructive dialogue, and started experimenting with that. So on the one hand, yeah, we're still these idealists and activists, but we also have different professional backgrounds. There's spatial knowledge in the team, but also social knowledge, pedagogy, sociology. I forgot the historian, sorry, and our artist too. Sorry, Bert. And we have like one foot in academics too, which also defines more or less the way we work. It's quite science-based. Some of us did their PhD on the practice that we are running, so there is always this link with academics, teaching, engaging students in our work, learning from what we do in the field and taking it into academical research. Another important aspect of Endeavour is that we are, or we chose to be a company, but a social enterprise. So we have a social mission, we have a societal mission. We want to realize an impact, but not, we do not subsidize. We're not a movement. We're not a non-profit. We chose to do this work as an enterprise. I think that kind of explains what kind of company we are. And we are also self-managed. So on the one hand, we are a cooperative, which means that the company is owned by the people who work in the company. And on the other hand, we are self-managed, so there is not one, there's not a hierarchy or a boss. We are all more or less equal, I think, and responsible for our own projects and what we do. So what's the Endeavour mission? Or what we believe that people are impacted, citizens are impacted a lot by the way their environment is designed, but hardly involved in these kind of processes. And this quote of Jane Jacobs illustrates that very well, that we should, if we want to make good cities for everybody, then we should also try to involve as many people as possible. The question is, of course, how do we do that? Another quote to illustrate that is Harvey's. Is Harvey, yeah, who even defines it as a fundamental right, and I think that's what Endeavour stands for. Is how can we give people their right to the city and access to these kind of processes that shape their environment. This is one of the images I love the most. Just that even children are impacted, maybe the most by the way we design infrastructure. In this case, the covering of the Antwerp ring road, but they are hardly involved. And the question is, if you want to involve them, how do you do that? And we, as architects, urban planners, are not really trained to engage in that kind of dialogue, but we believe it's possible. And so for the past 10 years almost, we've been experimenting with that. And on the one hand, we have commissioned work. It became a very funky scheme, but there's commissioned work and there is proactive work, which means that in the commissioned work we do is mainly for governments, local governments, administrations, cities, who ask us to guide processes, to design processes, and actually to design the dialogue and try to include different stakeholders, people that are usually not heard. We team up a lot with architects, more conventional type of architects or offices, where we are responsible for the research before the design and try to feed the research based on the dialogue we had with stakeholders. We also do a lot of research assignments. They are all socio-spatial topics, as we call them. So things like transition, climate adaptation, safety, they are very much related to space. And we focus on involving people also in that kind of research, user-centered research, as we call it. From the start, we've been engaging in projects that are not commissions too. That's what we call proactive projects, just because we felt like doing them and because we believe we could make an impact with that. And there's kind of a logic to it, that we allocate resources and time to do free work, to have more impact, but in return create some visibility for our office. We attract talented people and have fun. And so when we were asked to give a lecture about how do we design in dialogue and why do we design in dialogue, as we do, Sophie asked a question in our internal chat channel, asking the whole team to suggest projects and also indicate why we should show that kind of or that project and what was the dialogue in this case. So next we will, I'll present some different types of dialogues. Tim will moderate that a little bit. After that, we will tell you some more about the Studio Stadswaag project, where we hope there will be dialogue too. That's the goal. And after that, we'll even go there to have a look what the link between the academy and the campus and Stadswaag could be. So I give the floor to you guys.
Okay, so we've created this setting where I'm supposed to ask my colleagues questions to create a dialogue. So it's exciting because I might ask them some other questions than we've prepared to keep them on their feet. So let's see how that goes. So the whole idea is that we just selected some projects which we have not very much presented before, I would say. So we have all these lectures we've done before and this list of kind of best practices we present a lot. So we decided to do something different and make a whole new selection. So it's a bit different. You will hear like a lot of people taking the words. So also that's going to be a bit exciting in terms of time management and how this goes. But let's give it a go. And I think we'll start with Sophie.
Okay, so I've selected some very different projects and contexts. This is the first one. There is a small village in Belgium that's called Paradise. It's a really small town and it's nearby Menen. And so a bit the challenge was the city of Menen, they asked us to make a master plan. And in these questions, they already set up like a few spatial ambitions. For example, how can we do better for the housing? How can we have a better mobility? How can we have a safer space? But all very top-down ambitions, let's say, and very spatial. And then, we came in. And we started talking to a lot of different people in the village. And what we directly noticed is that actually they weren't really waiting for like all these kind of spatial interventions, but it was more there was like social ambitions that were really needed because then it's maybe get me a bit too far, but it's a town that's like really on the edge between the Flemish part, the Wallonia, and France. So there was a lot of friction between Dutch-speaking people, French-speaking people, a lot of new young people coming to the town, a lot of old people. So there were a lot of frictions actually. And this way we like convinced the city, okay, there are other things that are necessary to get into this master plan, not only spatial ambitions. And for example, then we adjusted our approach to the participation project trajectory. And this is an example. We did a parallel trajectory with kids because once we started walking around the streets and talking to people, we noticed that, okay, there are no playgrounds. Actually, there was one playground, and it was like this really busy road they needed to take from the school. So we did a trajectory with the local school and the kids. We talked about it, designed it. But I think that the most important thing that we did there was that we not only asked their opinion and sucked information out of them, we also when we talk about safe routes to go to this playground, we really try to make them experience it. So, for example, in the back of the picture, you can see these buildings. There was like the playground located, and instead of going to the main road that was very unsafe, we asked the local farmer if we could use the field to go through it, because it was an other way to make them experience, okay, what is it to go through a safe space, actually. So that's one kind of project we did. Okay.
As you know, I have some questions.
Okay, already, okay.
So I would say that a lot of the work we do, it's also a bit of context for you guys, we do something completely different as what we are commissioned to do, which can be quite annoying for people commissioning us. So what I wonder is, in this particular case, I also really don't know this case. It's how it goes when a company gets bigger. So how did this come about? How did you transition from a particular question into something very different? And did this then create some friction with the actual initial assignment?
Yeah, just what's the word for schepen?
Alderman.
Alderman.
Yeah.
So the alderman of spatial development, she was a bit stuck on the idea like, okay, but I need my spatial ambitions and I need my criteria so I can know, okay, which kind of developments can come here in the future for the village and so on. So she was very strict on that and a bit like in her head. That's the way she wanted it. So at first she was a bit looking strange at me. And she was like, why are you doing all these things? I just want my master plan and leave me alone. But then in the end, she started to see that it was really why we did it. And also by the end, there was so a lot of, not only the youngsters were involved, but also a lot of other groups. And by the end, like in the beginning, people were a bit critical or maybe a bit skeptical. But towards the end, because we did a lot of other things also, building stuff with them, and that made that people were very much more convinced by the master plan and really started living it in their head and trying to think about actions they could do. And that's when she started to switch a bit, also because people started telling her like, okay, you're really doing a good job. And then in the end, she was like, okay, fine. So, yeah.
So maybe another thing is like a lot of our assignments we're getting, like the question is make a master plan as if that's the only format they can think of, which I think is very funny. And a lot of times there's something completely different behind it, a very different reason. And I have a feeling in this particular case, there seems to be an underlying reason why they want a master plan, or did you identify that in a way?
Yeah, it's actually because like Paradise is a very small town, and they have a lot of other small towns in the region of Menen. And it was like because literally like cut down by a really big traffic road. So it's a bit like isolated. And they always say like, yeah, we always get forgotten from the policymakers. So this time it was also subsidized by the province of West Flanders. So there was money that they could use for it. So yeah, that was a bit the reason I think they said, okay, this year we're gonna take care of that village so they stop complaining. Yeah.
All right. Maybe one last one. Mm-hmm. Trying to keep track of the time a bit, but what I find interesting is also what this picture shows is that you're trying to divert something which is about very abstract ambitions, sort of rational reasoning, plan making towards more kind of experience-based ways of working. And how is this different from what we're used to seeing, and how do we kind of counteract that? Because we're often attracted to guide these kind of participatory processes which are very much pro forma, which is this kind of setting, I would say. But then what happens when you change direction? And is this sort of out of a reaction to what they initially expected?
Yeah, I think it just, of course, we had like this vague plan, like, okay, we have different phases, like, okay, we have the analyze phases, then we have like vision and then action. So it's like always a bit of a fast form we use or something, and we say, okay, then we're gonna do like a kickoff, and then we're gonna do like design week, and then a final event or something like that. So it's a bit, there are some key moments, let's say, but it's not that strict. So there's a lot of space to bend it a bit and to really see, okay, if we hear on the kickoff that we need to put extra focus on these young people, or we need to put focus on the more senior people, which was always also the case there. Then we still have a lot of freedom left to do that. So I don't think we try to cut it through.
Okay. I think we can move to the next one.
Okay, then a totally different context. So this one is in Antwerp, as you can see. It's a Theaterplein. This was a totally different context also because it was during Corona or COVID. And there was, I don't know if you've heard a bit in the news about it, the local news, but there was a lot of friction during COVID because, you couldn't go to the bars and stuff. So a lot of people went to the square to drink something, but also, there are a lot of skaters for the Senia already. It's really a local skate spot. And this led to a lot of friction because there was too much noise and so on. So a lot of the surrounding neighbors started complaining. And it came so far that there was like the plan for a skate ban on the square. Also at the Scheldekaaien, there's now a skate ban in Antwerp. And this led to a lot of skaters came together and said, okay, we need to do something about this. We need to start up the dialogue. And then they made this non-profit organization, KNS. I think you were wearing a shirt of it. And then we got into contact with them, not especially Endeavour, but Stadsform. It's kind of a spin-off of Endeavour. I think we'll talk about it later in the presentation. To like really start up the dialogue and to think about, okay, what is exactly the problem, and is there exactly too much noise? How can we try to put up a constructive dialogue instead of just getting into defense mode and just put up a skate ban? And that's when we started together with the skaters to we put up some dialogue sessions. First about the square, but then a bit later we started to also put up a bigger dialogue in Stadsform itself, and we invited international speakers from the skate council from Malmö to people from Rotterdam. So a lot of people to really try to open up the dialogue and make it much more positive. Also, we invited a lot of different policymakers, and it really shifted like the relation between the city and skaters. And I think we can really proudly say now that there's really been a switch, and now like the city is really asking the skaters for like when there's coming a new skate park to come, then they ask for advice and so on. So it's really really one of the projects that's most close to my heart, if I can say. And we also like put together like all these things and tips on how to also prevent sort of friction and so on, with a lot of advice, not only to skaters but also to policymakers. So I've put some down there on the stairs, so you can take them home if you want to read a bit more about it. I think that was about it, Matt.
Okay.
You have some questions.
I have a question about it. So first off, I think it's very interesting to see that while skateboarding is being encouraged everywhere, and there's a lot of talk about urban sports and whatnot and the Olympics, exactly at that same time we saw that this was being prohibited in Antwerp. So there's a very interesting tension we could work with, which I think is fascinating. I didn't really understand how this came about. But what I think is interesting is, why did these local skateboarders, which were extremely organized, I would say, I think they really knew what they were doing, why do you think they wanted to collaborate with us? That's something I wonder, you being very embedded in this process.
Yeah, I think it's a bit because, like Maarten said, like we really try to make the connection between all these different stakeholders and parties, for policymakers, but also architects, civilians, stakeholders. So I think because we have this like neutral role to play, and also have like a lot of connections to bring them together. I think that's a bit the main reason.
It's my lesson, you're stealing.
I'm sorry. Then it's a double lesson to remember. Yeah, I think that's a bit of the most important reason why. Yeah, because they like afterwards, Steve, one of the people from the KNS, he said like to me, because I was always like, okay, but I had a really smart role in this because I only just like put up these events and that was it, but you did everything and you have all the knowledge. I'm not a skater, by the way. I tried, but I failed. And then they said it's just because you guys like put things in motion and speeded up the process and like tried to dare us to do it, because he said that we just like give the extra fling. I don't know.
Okay.
I thought it was nice
That's
to
a pretty
hear.
good answer. Maybe we can move to the next one.
Yeah.
It's also yours. I think.
Yeah, okay, sorry, that's the last one. I'm gonna shut up. So that's actually a project that some colleagues of mine are working on, but I did a few sessions, so I will try to put it down as they told me. But this is like one of the proactive projects we do, like Maarten said in the beginning. And so we're not getting paid for this, but we do this really because we really think we have a lot of impact with these kind of projects. And this is one we do together with Samenlevingsopbouw of Antwerp, the Red Star Line Museum, and Permeke Library in Antwerp. And we actually, it started, but now it's really booming out. But it started with like at the library, there's a small square at the back, a small garden, but it's like there's no grass. But and actually, it started because there are a lot of women in this neighborhood. It's a really dense neighborhood, also with a migration background, and they tried to, because Samo works a lot with them, try to like put them together and make like a permanent group that comes together every week. And they try to make like a conversation about, okay, what is a safe space on this square? Why don't you always feel safe there? How can you try to pinpoint what's the reason why you don't feel safe, and how can you start a conversation about it? Especially because they're not always, sometimes there is also a language barrier, so they don't always know how to express themselves. And weekly, we try to open up the discussion through various methods. For example, we go down the neighborhoods and try to interview different people about it and so on. So really try to empower them, give them a voice. And the part of Endeavour is we try to get it a bit broader. So not only on this space, but also how can we think about a more feminine city all around Antwerp, and try to not only think about this square, but also other squares in Antwerp and other public space in Antwerp, and to broaden that dialogue about it. I don't know if it was a bit clear.
You're not so familiar with this project, so do you feel comfortable if I ask questions?
I will try. I did a few sessions.
I'll pick one maybe to think about how does this scale up, which so the whole conversation is about this particular inner courtyard, but it's a discussion which is in essence about the whole neighborhood. So what I wonder is what are the possible next steps which we could engage in, and how does this working together with an organization like Samenlevingsopbouw, who are in this for the long run, because they work with these people for years and years. So what does this mean for the contribution we can make and the next steps in this trajectory?
I think in the first place, because it's very much still experimenting a lot and more in the analysis phases. But and on the one hand, of course, Endeavour, we build up a lot of different methods and tools how to put up a dialogue and start a conversation. So that's one thing we try to put in. But like how to then get it more, upscale it more, is what we try to do is like, find like little building blocks that we can upscale for other, a bit like an old study you did, Tim, about safety space in I think it was the Handelstraat. Yeah, to really see, okay, to try to pinpoint why are you unsafe and can you use the right word for it, and how then does it translate in a spatial element or manner, and then also try to give it to the policymakers and try to make a difference, I guess. But it's still really in the early phase, so we're not there yet. Sometimes I don't even think we really know what we're going at, but I think that's a great part, to leave this open and see where it goes.
All right. Thanks. Let's maybe move to the next one. Get somebody else talking.
All right. Bert? Thanks. Okay. The motion scans in Antwerp, I think the big question in this assignment we got from the sports service of Antwerp was how do we get people to move more in and through public space? How do we keep a big relation, just moving, sporting, cycling, walking, has a lot to do with health, has a lot to do with people's happiness. How do we get people outdoors? That was the main question. And I think the big focus of this project, if you think about, okay, why do I cycle and why do my kids play on the street? It has to do with safety. It has to do with the possibility, with infrastructure, but it also has to do with feeling yourself at home in the city, knowing where you're going, a city being children friendly, being friendly for elderly. So it became this whole big question of what makes or what triggers people to move actively in the city. It's something that the sports service wanted to learn because they wanted also to impact on spatial development. A lot of things are happening. A lot of squares are being redesigned in Antwerp. When they do that, a lot of different city services give their advice. Youth service might do it, or the green service might say, "Oh, you need so many trees." But also the sports service wanted to give their advice and actually look at mobility and look at movement through different lens, not through safety and regulations and that kind of thing, but really try to find and feel what triggers a neighborhood. And to be able to do that, you need a type of evaluating space. You need a lens. You need a scan to come to a new place and say, okay, what am I looking at? I'm looking at the street. There's so many different layers you can look at. So they were really looking for a method more than a design, a method to look at space, a method to understand why people move in a certain area. And together with the city services in 5 different neighborhoods in Antwerp, we tried to develop that method. The first one, we tried some things, something worked, something didn't. We tried it another time in another place, and together we sort of build a toolbox, build a method, and now, today, just like a lot of other city services, the sports service gives their advice on urban renewal, which makes, I think, a difference and learn something new about moving in space.
Okay, so I would say we had a quite atypical commissioner, let's say, in this assignment. So it's the first time that we actually, something got asked to us by the local sports service. So I think it has to do with us trying to, they felt the need to be able to reason more in a spatial way, because that's the way they can actually impact a debate with mobility experts, spatial planners, and so on. So I would say this whole assignment, in a sense, which I've been very much involved in as well, so I know, was very much about teaching them how to kind of reason in a spatial way and giving them particular tools to do that. What type of tools are we talking about, and what do you think are the most important effects of this thing we did together with us, as a sort of learning by doing research together with them?
Yeah. I think there are 2 very important things in that. The first thing is we specifically didn't make a plan. If a square is renewed in Antwerp, there's someone from the urban side, that a designer. There is a main designer that has his ideas, that has to integrate a lot of different questions from a lot of different sides, and he's the one that brings everything together. So as a sports service, you can't come with your own design. We need a different tool. We need a different language to negotiate. So it was really also learning a dialogue between the sports service and the designing department of Antwerp. Okay, how do you how do we communicate? What are the reasonings behind it? It was also a question to formalize it. If you ask a green service how much green he wants, that he will give you an exact square meters based on GIS data that's hard science, and it's hard to argue with that. But something like moving is really subtle, has to do with a lot of different things, needs to be really integrated. So they were actually looking for a method to make their voice louder. If you have a method, if your advice always comes in the same structure, you are learning together. And I think that idea is really strengthening what moving can mean.
Yeah, I think still working. Yeah, I think it's interesting that we've seen throughout the last 10 years a series of projects with very different people from different kind of services within city administrations employing us, asking exactly the same question, whether it being from somebody who's dealing much more with safety in public space, who's then like more involved in social work, to people dealing with youngsters in public space, to people dealing with sports in public space. And the question is always the same, like try to have us, make us have a more impact on the, let's say, the spatial discussion within a city administration. And I find it fascinating that there's different iterations, and I wonder where this stops. Will there be more and more disciplines that have to have an impact on spatial design? And then is this potentially problematic if there's more and more voices involved?
I'll relate. I'm from Ghent. I relate to another city, and I can say it is problematic. It is when every sector of government, when everyone wants to have a voice, at a certain point, it becomes impossible to design. It becomes impossible to satisfy everyone with an urban design. Also with, for example, electric cars. Everyone is putting more and more claims on public space, and it becomes really hard to, I think it becomes just harder to design. I think one of the great things in the movement scans is that we don't strictly look at sports. We look at mobility. We ask people how they cycle. We went to a lot of different type of actors. We went to schools, but for example, also the park rangers of the Rivierenhof, elderly people. So I think which makes a motion scan more interesting is that it's already integrated, that you start dialogue. Actually, you start a dialogue with your friendly sectors, youth and elderly and different, in a much earlier stage, which also makes that the advice is a lot more flexible and integrated and takes from the beginning a little bit different spatial claims into account. And I think that could be start of a way out. But then again, after that, you can give your advice, but then the fire department comes and he has strict rules and they are non-negotiable. So another dialogue starts, but then at least you're front and you have an idea of where a lot of people want to go. So it makes you stronger, I guess.
Okay. So you see, participation is not only with the citizen, but also within local administration. People disagree. There's a lot of layers. There's no such thing as government or local administration. And I think at least half of our assignments are much more about dealing with these frictions than with actual citizens who use these spaces, which is something we've learned over the years, I think. Maybe we can move to the next one. Bert, you look surprised. Okay.
We were commissioned by the Heritage Agency of the Flemish government to map the social cultural significance of built heritage. We were trying to get a grip on the social values of built heritage using an ethnographic approach. As a matter of fact, people are confronted on a daily basis with built heritage unconsciously most of the time. Already in the 1970s, Henri Lefebvre wrote that space is a social product, not made by experts exclusively, but reproduced on a daily basis. People giving meaning to space, and by giving meaning, symbolically appropriating space. And you could use similar kind of approach to heritage. There are a lot of, you could say, tactical valuing processes going on. They are not giving much account when authors are writing about valuing processes of built heritage, but on a daily basis, unconsciously, most of the time, people are confronted with significant historical buildings, sites, landscapes, and so on. And we tried to use an open approach towards the people, mostly users of built heritage. Let's say a former convent used as a library. People are going to the library to get books, not to visit that site as being historical, as being a built heritage, but they are experiencing the building. So we asked users, passers-by, locals, and most of the time they told us about their experiences, their certain connections with their personal history, events they remembered. They were talking about sense of place, referring to the building as a meeting place, and so on. Sometimes rather vague processes of appreciation, not so fixed, not in, you could say, fixed grids used by experts of heritage a lot of times. So a more fluid, hybrid process of heritage appreciation, of heritage valuing. So that was our main concern.
But what I wonder, it's not the question I prepared, but why in the hell did they commission this, or what do they want to do? So we created some idea of what is the different social values you can attribute to built heritage or built heritage sites. So what do they want to do with it, like in the commission themselves? So the Flemish government in terms of this kind of heritage agency.
Yeah, I think one of the hidden, you could say agendas was showing how important heritage, that built heritage has also a meaning for daily users, and they also asked in some way to mobilize people towards built heritage. So it was twofold, you could say.
Okay, maybe could be interesting to give us an example of a building or a site where you feel that there's a conflict between different perceptions of what the actual, let's call it, heritage value is of this particular place?
On the photograph, you see the vegetable growers. They are working on the domain of the Abbey of Bornem. The Abbey of Bornem is built heritage, reused by an estate developer, but also purposed to be historical library. So there are more than one function applied to it. Here you see the vegetable growers. They are already, let's say, for half a century active on the domain, and they at the moment we were visiting the domain, they had a kind of conflict with a heritage expert. They dubbed him the desk man, and the desk man didn't approve of this practice, and the desk man had the plan for a historical botanic garden in line with the tradition of the convent, and so they were on a sort of collision course, the deskmen and the vegetable growers.
So I think it's clear there's different types of values surrounding these type of places.
While you could say in some way they are living heritage.
Yeah.
They themselves were saying we are in fact doing the same as the monks before us. And there was still another view which was very interesting. The former abbot, he was saying, for me, the authentic core value is about community life, is about religion, and now the abbey has stopped to be a religious building because those two main aspects are disappeared or are disappearing. They cannot be transferred. So you had the heritage expert, the vegetable growers, the abbot, and also the estate developer. In some way negotiating the space or limiting the spaces that could be used by the public, accessible to the public. While when we interviewed people, most of the time those respondents found it very important that reusing built heritage, the building would be accessible for the public.
Okay. I did a bit of a time check, and we're running ridiculously out of time, as it goes with these kind of things. But we started a bit later, so I'm going to give myself the freedom. Is it still okay? The attention span is there? Okay. So let's move to the next one. I think...
This is Ringpark Zuid, Ringpark South. This is one of the biggest segments of along the ring road of Antwerp. Ringpark Zuid is along the Spaghetti Knoop, a big junction of a highway junction that is being reduced. So they're making it more compact. And what it gives actually on 3 different sides, it creates a lot of new accessible space. We are talking about hectares and hectares of new park space. And the big question there is how do we use it? What do we want to do with that much new open space? It's a really complex part, but at the same time you have it's park space. It's for New South, the big buildings for where rich people live. It's next to the Brede Rodewijk, a very densely populated city. It's next to the Tentoonstellingswijk, a place where a lot of older families live. The Kielblokken with their high-rises and their social housing. So you have a lot of new park space, and how does it enter, or can it mean something for all these different types of users? And also the big question, how do you talk about it? It's a project that is huge, that is immensely complex, that is also being maybe prepared for 2030 maybe. So how can people talk about something that is so far and so complex? That is really, I think, the question in Ringpark South.
Which is also exactly my question, I think. So what's interesting about this whole discussion about the Antwerp Ring Road is that people have been arguing for this for decades, literally. And then all of a sudden, things have to happen very fast as it goes. And there's a design process and it's all speeded up. And on the one hand, you have people who've been involved with this for a very long time, who are experts in the mobility issues, know exactly all the numbers, they know the historics. But then on the other hand, it seems to be super difficult to reach out to other people. Like there's a whole generation of, I would say, kids and young people living in these neighborhoods who have no idea what an overcapping or a capping of a ring road actually means. And how do you try to bridge this gap between hardcore activism, which has been going on for a long time, then speeding up of this procedure, and all these target groups which we haven't reached so far?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that this process has a lot of layers. You have the werkbanken, which is sort of the distinguished activists, the city, the people that know a lot. That's a first layer. Then you have the open communication days, the ringdagen, the you can say very traditional way of communicating big events, exhibitions, public dialogue, that type of stuff. You have a third layer, which we called werkateliers, which is a group of people from the neighborhood, 25 people from different neighborhoods, that really sort of join in a group, join in a band, that we see not once, but we see every month. A group that represents their own neighborhood and that really takes the time to learn about the complexity of this project. They can also give us agenda points for the design that work in so one, I could say almost civilian panel that guides us. And then there is a fourth layer, I would call field work, which is just random things to do. Just go to a target group and ask, okay, how do you want to be involved? What do you want to happen? How do you want to have a dialogue? And it takes all different kinds and shapes. It could be with schools. We went to some schools and developed some sort of game on the Konijnenweg where they would put flags on spaces, on places that they liked and disliked, and have a dialogue on that. It could be with people from the mothers, Turkish mothers group Alma, and with them we went to another park to see what they attributed, what they liked, how they look at park management. It can be just have walks, have dialogues. Really, it's about finding a group, someone asking about how they want to be involved, and finding a specific topic to have a dialogue on, not trying to communicate the whole complexity, but just on one thing you can change. Really finding a subject, because the big picture is covered by all the other layers. So it's fieldwork, which is also the most fun, because you're always finding out something new, and it keeps me fresh as somewhere in intermediate between designers and city and the people, because I think with the same methods you always get the same results, or you get the same type of answers, and with a different method, new information appears, pops up, and it's also for me a trick to bring the designers with me on these dialogue things, so they can experience themselves. So it's as much about letting people show each other than being in the middle of it.
Okay, very clear. I think we believe in fieldwork, super important. So it's totally different than a type of dialogue around the table, and I think it's been shown in quite a lot of these projects, and that we try to be very adaptive in that, and that you should never forget that there's a value to being in public space and engaging in public space, and it's something we tend to forget and like to kind of rationalize, intellectualize, but it's something, sometimes it's just about doing these kind of safaris and other kinds of things. Maybe the next one, I think is the next to last one.
I think it's the last one.
Not,
But
that's not completely true.
Not completely. Yeah, no, that's okay. No, I will try to not make it too long because I also want to leave some time for the discussion with the group, which might be interesting. Yeah. And also because my lesson was already touched by Sophie, the neutral outsider role that we played in this particular project. Noorderwijk and Morkhoven are two boroughs of the city Herentals. There was a kind of malfunctioning between the city center and those two outside laying boroughs who were actually spatially a bit parted from the city, where those the people who lived there always had like a kind of feeling they were treated like by stepmotherly by the city. All the money went to the city center, to the big projects, and they were always left alone. This was one thing where when the city commissioned us to make master plans for the next 20, 30 years in those two boroughs. And it was for us a good thing that we could be there, mostly for the city of Herentals. It was good that we were there as outsiders, as since they were not really active in those boroughs. They were always looking at the city like, we don't trust you, go away, leave us alone, or at least give us some money and let us do it ourselves. But don't come stick your nose into our businesses. You don't know really what we are doing here. So the fact that we were there, like already took down those tensions between the city and those boroughs laying next to it. And also when going into projects like this, it was a kind of isolated small towns where you have some very elaborated local organizations like the local church and the local youth movement, and they never talk to each other. They both have a lot of ground position in the city in the center of their places, but they always thought for themselves, this is my part, this is your part, and they weren't functioning as a center of their town. And also just by playing your outside role in dialogue, you can sometimes like ask, even if you know it's a naive question, you can still ask those naive questions to the people surrounding at the table, or who actually don't want to talk to each other, but by you re-questioning those actually naive questions, they do start talking about it. And sometimes it's about more like about getting these people to start having the dialogue than already thinking about what should be planned in 20 years.
Maybe to challenge that, how can you be neutral if you're being paid to do something? How do you experience this? How do you experience this yourself? Because I find it interesting that you are, because we've been in this for a longer time than you are, and we've been always thinking about, okay, so how do we create some sort of in-between facilitatory role for ourselves, and is this even possible within the type of role of commissioned projects we play? So I find it interesting that you picked this lesson, and is it possible?
There is a reason why I put neutral between two brackets, because I do think that you don't have a possibility of being fully neutral, eitherwise because we are paid by the city, otherwise because we also have our own kind of imagination on how we think that place might be evolving. But being neutral, I think this was already touched in the first. You can be neutral if you challenge your commissioners by challenging their task that they're giving to you, and by doing that, I think you're already like kind of not walking too hard in the footstep of your commissioner as you actively challenge them to rethink the questions that they are asking you.
I think it's an interesting answer. Also, I think there's no such thing as a neutral mediator. So the idea that if you facilitate a dialogue between different target groups, you have to be neutral. To me, it's very strange because we have very much have an opinion. If somebody's keeping on these same discussions about where do I park my car, we simply disagree and tell them that's not the way to go. And I think we earn quite a bit of respect even in these kind of situations by having an actual opinion. So I think it's very interesting. This whole idea of somebody who organizes participation has to be neutral, sort of has to put aside their particular expertise. I think it's simply not true. And I think a lot of the assignments we do them differently because we have some kind of spatial knowledge behind us. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think you can sometimes maybe like even, but that's not a nice thing to say, but even fake neutrality or something. For example, if you in the first time someone says about parking their car, you immediately say "fuck you," I don't agree. It doesn't match when you first listen to them. You say, okay, I'm gonna note this, I'm gonna take this to the commissioner, and then actually say, oh yeah, they're begging again for parking lots. But you can alter a little bit in your neutrality, I think.
Okay, it's interesting. I think then the last project, which I think relates to the remainder of this night in a sense, so that's why we end with it.
Stadsform is one of the also not commissioned projects, but it's a proactive project that we initiated ourselves. I think you'll believe me if I tell you that in these kind of projects that we do, we learn a lot. There's a lot of knowledge exchange in this kind of projects. I think that's one of the biggest impacts that we have even. Topics like or knowledge about the use of space, about the children and how they use space, about women in the city, and like all these topics, they transcend the projects that we do. So it's so in the project that we do, so we learn a lot, and we always think about how can we scale that kind of impact, how can we scale that dialogue that we have, and make the knowledge that we gain, how can we make it more open source? So Stadsform is one of those experiments that we do in trying to establish and continue the dialogue on not linked to a specific geographical project or space, but just in general. And so a few years ago, I think it was during the lockdown, that it was a great time to start an event space. And we were asked by the owner of a building here in the Stadswaag, the square around the corner, to if we were interested in curating kind of a communal space where on the ground floor of a student housing block. And the first thing we did was we organized a round table with some stakeholders from the neighborhood. It was also the university, the academy, and neighbors, the city of Antwerp. And we asked the question, okay, we have 400 square meters. What could be an added value? Do we need another co-working space or whatever? And what came out of it, the result was that there is an ecosystem of people who are engaged in city making in different ways, from academics as well as city administrations, as well as activists organizations, and that there is a need for a specific place that we can, a physical place that we can like go to, give visibility to that network, to that ecosystem, have that kind of dialogue, because there is the Flemish Architecture Institute, for example, that we were also sitting at the table, who organize a lot of also debates and expositions and lectures and so on. But they mainly attract architects. It's by architects for architects. And what we noticed when we tried to, we did a very crazy experiment and tried to buy the police tower here in Antwerp. Got completely out of hand, but what we learned was that we didn't buy the tower, but we could organize a few debates in the single in the cultural center in Antwerp. And what we noticed is that we didn't only reach architects, but also engaged citizens and students and so that I think that time we were triggered by the fact that we could were looking for a place to really make that kind of dialogue tangible in Antwerp. So when we were asked to curate the space here in Stadswaag, it was I think a perfect occasion to do that. Concretely, so in the past 3 years, 2 years, we've been organizing. Sorry, you're waiting to ask a question.
Okay, no,
We've been organizing lectures. It's not only, let's say, Endeavour who decides what the lecture is going to be about or organizes this. It's mainly giving the space to our network. The lectures are or lecture series are organized by NGOs that we know, by the university. It's also a way to communicate about a lot of let's say PhDs and research that's been done in the University of Antwerp that could have potentially or that could have an impact if it was communicated in an accessible way. So in a way, it's making a lot of knowledge more accessible, and I could go on for.
Yeah. Maybe one question. Also unprepared. What do you think Stadsform contributes to Endeavour and vice versa? And also, how should they develop in the future? Should they divert, or should they stick together? It's an ongoing open question, so there will be. I'm also very curious what the answer will be. I know.
Yeah, it's yeah, we need to talk about that. It's a way to also, I don't know, think about the things we do and the impact that we have and the topics that are relevant at this era, like to have a reflex, have a to make it more accessible, to communicate about it in a way that you also reach more than only professionals or specialists. I think the skate magazine and the whole skate movement was a very good example of that. To sit there and have a discussion with an alderman of the city of Malmö, who is really the alderman of skating, I think, and the skaters of Kanis Theaterplan. For me, that was like the perfect. That was the goal of Stadsform, which in projects we don't always have that kind of impact. I don't know, but it's. I think the relation between the commission projects and the proactive projects is also applicable here. It inspires us just to be there and to learn, and we can apply that knowledge in the projects that we do, and vice versa.
I think it's a decent answer. My opinion as a non-neutral mediator, I think it's also an outlet, maybe, so sort of a pressure valve for things you're frustrated with within certain projects or types of knowledge you acquire which you cannot give enough space. And I think that's what makes Stadsform very appealing for a lot of people here, and that's why people in the team also want to contribute to it. So I think it's quite important as a, I don't know, as a vehicle to have to give this some space. But maybe that's enough for now from our side. Sorry for running out of time. That was to be expected, I have to admit. But if there's any questions, I think now is the time. Yeah. And after that, there's still something more about this projector surrounding the square. But maybe there's some questions or clarifications.
Thank you so much for all these amazing examples. I think it was quite clear what you wanted to do. I have one question that's more about the organizational form, because you explained you're a cooperative and it's a kind of company. So I'm wondering how you balance out the proactive works that you do that are mainly for free, and then the commissioned paid work, and who can do the unpaid work and for how long, and how do you balance it out in a company, because everyone needs to survive at the same time. So I'm very curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's an ongoing experiment. There is a business logic to it, of course. There's just the fact that we want to survive and keep on working and earning our earnings with the work that we do. There is the impact that we want to have. So one answer could be that it's something that we decide together. Like every Monday morning, we sit together, the whole team, and there are bestekken, tenders, whatever, that we look at and together decide is okay in terms of revenue. This might be an interesting assignment to apply for, but we don't really like the context, or we don't feel we can have an impact there, or this looks like an interesting assignment, but there's not enough budget, but maybe we still want to do it because we can learn from it. So there is always a trade-off between, we say 3 things, is the financial health and us trying to survive and not more, not generating profits or growth for the sake of it. So there's the financial, being healthy in a financial way. There is the impact that we want to have on the way cities are and environment is produced. So that's the external impact, but there is also an internal impact in the way that our own well-being we try to also focus on, and so if people are very happy to work on a project that doesn't generate a lot of financial income, but generates a lot of fun and appetite to keep on working and doing the things we do, then that might be a good investment to do. And we decide that together.
Also, it's might in the beginning we were thinking this is sort of you just basically lose a lot of money doing this kind of work, but it sometimes really works the other way around. Like when we did this whole Oudown project, trying to buy this building, it's like something we just threw ourselves into, but it generated us a lot of work afterwards, because we're working a lot of assignments now about cooperative housing or alternative financing, which would have been totally impossible if we would have not engaged in this type of project. So a lot of the proactive projects actually are a sort of a way of branding in a way, which is more of a logic we've discovered, I think, along the way. But there's we don't have a sort of a fixed way of deciding we're spending too much time in this or that project. The ethical commission, yeah. You were part of the ethical. So there's no fixed. It's sometimes it's very difficult, because you spend a lot of time in these proactive projects and you have to decide whether it's too much or not.
Maybe just quickly that it also changes through time. Now a colleague can do a project half a year and it will be your turn when it's next. And it's also not that the people that work here the longest can do that type of job, but somebody that just started can also join directly in that proactive work. So it's really, for me as someone who does a lot of the paid stuff too, it's also just knowing that what I generate makes the other projects possible a bit, which keeps me on my feet. Doesn't always have to be part of it myself. And at one point, if I stumble upon something that frustrates me, I know I can do it and I will get the support, which is, I think, for me, important.
Okay. Any more questions?
I can maybe yes. So thank you, and I have a very general question. If I understood correctly, you said at the beginning that you design processes. You don't propose a fixed design about, let's say, a square, any project you get. How do you design a process? You're architects of processes, meaning like you go to the space and then you think of all possible interested parties, you give to the parties the right questions to ask. So what that means, And if I understood correctly, it's about process. How you drop the architectural bias, which is a very strong bias because I understand you're mostly architects. Yeah.
It's a very good question. I think a lot of answers to it. Maybe somebody else wants to start. Okay. Like, it's okay. Yeah, I can start. I think we made a very conscious decision in the very beginning that we don't want to design, which has been debated a couple of times over the course of time because we get confronted with very bad designs sometimes, which we might do better. But so we feel that it's you can't play the type of role we are playing if you actually have to put this into a plan. That's something we feel is impossible, this kind of bias, which is one part of it. Another thing is this idea of process design. It's a craftsmanship behind it. It's a trade. It's something you learn, but you can't really, there's no schools teaching it or something. So it's something we kind of come up along the way, and we've been for the last, I think, 2 or 3 years, which is something which Jacob has been engaging in quite a lot, trying to actually abstract our own lessons from all these types of processes we have designed and the building blocks we use, and so trying to find our own structure in it. But I would say it's almost a trait which is not being taught anywhere, which I think is very interesting. Yeah, maybe somebody else.
I think. How would you, or how do you design a process? First of all, on a whiteboard. It has to do with just finding your groups, finding the timing, finding the kind of moments you want to integrate, keeping your goal in the end in reach, and then trying to play with different lines. I once gave that course and someone described it as, it's kind of a chess game between different parties. They just said, we have 5 different parties and sometimes you want to join them, sometimes you want to keep them together, we want to reach on a certain topic, we want to reach back to the whole level. And planning that out, that's sort of a game. And in the end you have a structure. I wish I could show one.
Because I also studied here, I did interior architecture here, and what I noticed, because I've been working here for now 2.5 years at Endeavour, and in the beginning, they don't teach that in school, and then I got here and I started learning it, and now I don't know, I'm brainwashed or something. I can't think now in my head. I'm always when I start a new project, it's just something you do. You start to think in a process, and it makes much more sense. And you notice this also when you work a lot with other companies and architects that they don't think like that, and in a totally different way. And then it's really satisfying if you can put a horizon or a strategic way of how are we going to go there, and it's really but it's a way of thinking that it's hard to
and also getting used to a lot of adapting skills through the process. I think that you be flexible, and the process itself is a thing, and you can try to imagine how it will be, but you can never really fully predict how it will turn. So during the process, there is also a lot of place for flexibility and adapting.
It's always designed in the proposal phase. So we win an assignment with the process that we design. So the proposals that we have to make are already the project, actually, and this is how we see it. This is the project, the process. This is how much this steering committee will meet, everything. And then half of the time you win and half the time you lose. So, which is a good ratio. So.
Maybe one last thing to add is that sometimes people ask us, so are you not frustrated that you're not designing while you're trained as a designer? And then we sort of always say, but we design methodologies, we design processes. And I think it's important to apply design thinking to doing these things, to set up dialogues, to set up methodologies, to set up process, an act of design, I think, which is kind of undervalued in a way.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on on a story that went sour, where you did not succeed in mobilizing, rethinking, or because that would also be very learnful, I think, to understand how things go wrong and what you can do about it and why it went wrong.
Yesterday evening I had the worst workshop of my life, to be honest. It's one where no, it was between some nature parties, some farmers at the moment, and a lot of things happening in the periphery of Antwerp, where we just noticed there was too much going on in the sector of farming at this moment to have a discussion. I have some other projects that I'm just saying now, okay, I don't want to, you can't have those discussion at this moment, we need more time. And I think time is always the most frustrating thing in these type of things. I always wish there was no deadline that we could recreate, give time, zoom in, find a specific ground and go forward on that. And I think that my most frustrating finished projects are also the ones that I feel I had to end too quickly, or because there was something that needed to be finished or find out.
Yeah, sometimes politics happen. It's very frustrating. And we're doing something which we very much believe in, and it seems to be working. And then there's a particular alderman who still expects their master plan, so they can display it out in the open. And yeah, if you don't comply to that, then you're in a lot of trouble, which you've had for a couple of times. Sometimes you can find new allies and divert it, but that happens. It can be very frustrating because you feel you have a whole community on board and really finding a course of action and over the top.
Yeah, maybe it's a question we get a lot is, okay, you do participation, and so how do you measure the success of a process, and so what was a good process and what was a bad one, and but like for example, the amount of people that we reached is not an indicator for success. I'm not sure if you agree, but I feel that the sense of ownership that people involved get about the process is the impact that you have. So like there are a lot of different agendas and perspectives on a certain, let's say, the transformation of a space, and there is not one solution or design that pleases everyone. But the fact that they are heard and that their perspective is heard is often or sometimes enough to also let go of their perspective. And the fact that they were heard, I think, is kind of an impact.
One more question?
Your method reminds me a lot of artistic thinking, actually. Open, unended, process-oriented, and so on. Where does art and where do artists fit in your projects and methodologies, like open and creative and artistic thinking?
I think perhaps it's a bit thinking in diagrams. I mean, more kind of not topological approach or thinking, not too fixed. And yeah, that's I think similar to artists. You have something perhaps in mind, but you're not. It has to crystallize yet. But it's not that you don't have a kind of direction, you have a kind of vector, but you your a trajectory in the making, so to say. While doing it, you are learning this kind of iteration, and it's important is also, or you could say of greatest importance is the process itself, not only the destination.
Yeah, you meant working with, yeah, yeah, yeah. For example, I'm doing a project now in Mechelen, in Muizen, a small part, and there we're clicking actually a spatial trajectory, also a master plan, for like 2 squares and the connection between the 2 squares. So that's more the spatial kind of part, and we participate with the different stakeholders and so on. But we're clicking it together with art in assignments trajectory, kunst in opdracht. In this way, so we can have like a translation of the plan already in the space. So it's like een doorvertaling, a quick win. So they're doing something on the square already. It can be temporarily, or permanent. And it's actually super interesting because like it's 2 different artists on the 2 different squares, and they're also using a very different approach for. So the one artist, she really already has this kind of vision, and she's trying because like one of the visions in the more spatial master plan is about to bring the Dijlen, the water a bit more in the town, and she's working on this more of spatial ambitions, let's say, to make like a community garden with a lot of different citizens, and to like do a lot of workshops on the different plants that are growing there. So she already has like a sort of view where she's going, while the other artist, he's working on the other square, and he's really trying to, he has no idea yet what he's gonna do on the square, but he's like really trying to talk to the people that aren't being heard. So a lot of people that are living in the social blocks there, and he's really like, he's like every week he's there and talking to a lot of different people, and like now he's going to make a camping on the square and just try to let all different people like live it, the square, and see what they are feeling and which kind of ideas are getting in mind. So yeah, so the one starts from a vision already, and the other is like taking a totally different approach, but it's very interesting for us because it's totally different methods that we use. So I'm really interested to see where it goes and how the 2 can click together. It's not easy, but yeah, it's super interesting.
But I think, to be honest, we have not engaged a lot with artistic practice so far. I have to be honest, that's really limited. I think it is to be explored.
What do you mean, Nico?
No, I remember a discussion we had maybe at the very beginning when we met a few years ago, where you said it would be nice maybe sometimes to invite an artist to the office to see a plan or a design you make and then give feedback. And just to kind of bring in very temporary, like an artist inside to reflect on what you do.
Yep.
This could be interesting, and this kind of reciprocal feedback loops that we can create.
Absolutely. So we're not artists apart from, right? But in a way you could see starting a company and designing dialogue as an artistic practice too, as a social sculpture. And on the other hand, there are some kinds of projects where we encounter, or where the spatial world encounters the artistic world, and that is in art integration projects. We did one. We helped a little bit. It was called Expo 2018 for the district of Antwerp, where we discovered the struggle between. What we learned was that we, as a facilitator of the process, needed to really secure the ambitions and to especially avoid that if you engage with citizens or people, to avoid that everyone starts designing or acting as an artist, or so the most input that we got in that project was it needs to be something that you can sit on, or that you can find shelter under, or a poem written on the side of a facade. Well, but it's a matter of asking the right questions. If your question is what kind of artwork would you want, okay, then people are trying or acting as an artist. But I think, as in other processes where we have to deal with architects who are also geniuses, creative geniuses, I think it applies also a little bit in this kind of art integration projects, where you need to facilitate the process and allow for dialogue and different perspectives, but always keep your eye on the ambitions, and especially the project that we're going to do here in Stadswaag. The question is not what would you like here, but is what should this be about? What is important? What does the future of this neighborhood look like? And then in the second phase, what can an artwork in any form help to do that?
Yeah, for me it might have been a little bit more concrete. We might have a second artist in our midst. Our graphic designer is also a photographer, which I think she learned us to the value of a good picture of view, but also to take your time to look at a picture. And it's now something we implement in some workshops, in some methods. People bring pictures, take their time, look at each other's photographs, talk about that. For me, that's something I've learned from an artist in a workshop, I would say.
I think we will conclude here almost. I also wanted a little bit to agree with them on that it's not so possible to decently integrate art into our processes, as they're mostly of the time they're like with deliverables at the end of a project, and you have to make something, and there's not all. You also have to have those tenders where you put prices on what you will do, and you have to compete against other bureaus in the same sector. And if you want to spend a lot of time of some slowness that I think you sometimes need in artistic projects, you just can't always build them into our projects. But therefore, I'm also happy that we are collaborating here with the Expanding Academy on a very process-fixed trajectory here on Studio Stadswaag, which I think is about time to introduce.
Because you say like art comes in this kind of architectural or art integration project always come at the end, or they start to think about it towards the end of the process. So it will be very interesting, I think, and also an interesting exercise maybe for you guys in relation to the Flemish government to start implementing that art could be the starting point rather than the end point. And what kind of process could you then start to establish or stimulate where art is at the beginning of the process and not.
You came up by this just at the moment, because I haven't heard you say it before in our meetings. It's a good.
No, and it's also something each time I get asked to do an art integration, I say no, because I don't want to come in the end. No, because I think art can be an energy that is at the starting point of a process, as a service or as a gesture, and then the artist can disappear again. And then you can finish the work, or the architect can finish the work. No, it's like, it's not per se that an artist always has to come to drop something.
But we've also been frustrated with this art integration.
Yeah.
Again, we pin down why it's been so frustrating and impossible to deal with it. But so there might be other ways to engage with. We haven't experimented with that much. I see it as an invitation.
No, and I think maybe what we will try to do at the Stadswaag is a first step in because the initial invitation was also the classical invitation of make a sculpture on the square, maybe you can invite some students from the academy, do a contest, select one, produce. And now we were capable of bending it into a process to say, like, yeah, but first maybe we should think what that square needs and what can be the role of art in that square. And because the academy is just attached to it, it's maybe more interesting to see how the dynamic of this school and all the creativity that is here can have a forum on the square, like can become public. So to kind of maybe perforate the school and implement the square into the school and the school on the square. Which I don't know how it will work, because we now have this goal to have 2-3 years of experimentation and to see what can happen. But this is maybe a first questioning of what art in public space could be. And you already have a concrete, I mean, it's a shared concrete proposal to go and see the space we think is very interesting, which is on the periphery of the school, leaning against the square, how that can be activated.
Yes, before going there, if you want to just show the timeline a little bit, so...
We're gonna do it anyway, Nico. We're gonna show the timeline. You told us not to, but we're gonna show it.
It's very nice to put all the question marks.
Yeah. Still to be filled in. We're in this trajectory of Studio Stadswaag the next 2 years, and it will be divided in 4 sprints. And the first sprint is in collaboration with Endeavour and Stadsform. And there are actually three things in this first sprint. We will have moments of inspiration. We will have a dialogue on Stadswaag, and then we will have a summer school at the end of the project in September. So these are the moments of inspirations. We've already had 3 of them actually in Stadsform at the other side of the square in the end of 2022. Some of those will be you can listen to them on our website, Stadsform. This one right now with the red thing around is happening right now. In 2 weeks we have a book launch of a book that is commissioned, is put together and written by Maarten. It's in Stadsform, I think, in 2 weeks, or is it here? It is here, and there will still be 2 other moments of inspirations yet to be determined what exactly. And during those moments, and this is the next slide, we actually want to get this Stadswaag in dialogue. Here are some questions that we want to ask during the next couple of months, and this is an invitation to you guys or people you know, if you want to join us in this first sprint of Studio Stadswaag, where we were mostly triggered a little bit by a space at this moment that is just between, and it's a room, we will visit it from the academy, but it's actually also the big gate to the Stadswaag, and it's closed, and it's always closed. It's only open for logistic reasons, and we see a first step in maybe trying to experience with opening these gates or using this space, and think about how this space maybe can show a link between the neighborhood and the academy, and vice versa. So how can we use this place to see what this neighborhood is thinking about, how we can link the academy to its direct surroundings, and how can we activate this strange place we were about to visit. The last slide is then just the summer school. In the end of the first sprint, there will be a summer school organized with the topic public space as a social sculpture. And I think this is now the invitations to check with security. And if you're interested for more information, you can always email Nico or me. The email addresses are over there. Thank you.